Hello and welcome to the latest episode of our Insights interview series. Today we're looking at design experience, and we've got the guru of design experience in events, Andrew O'Loughlin, joining us today. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Georgie. Fantastic to be here.
Now, it's so good to have you here because it's such a, well, it's a topical thing always with events, is around the design and the experience of those who come to events, but particularly over sort of the change in the event industry over the last 6 months. So Andrew, for those of you who don't know, Andrew is a mentor, an advisor, a facilitator, a coach with over 20 years experience in the event industry, including organisations like Limelight Sports, other mass participation events such as the Commonwealth Games, FINA. He's undertaking postgraduate research at the moment on the influence of events. And over the last 6 months, particularly, he has been giving a voice to the event industry through his event show. Panel discussions is probably the best way to describe them. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I want to start, do you want to tell me a bit about what event design or experience design is, and how you've sort of reached this area through your work in events?
Yeah, great. Thanks again, Georgie. It's brilliant to be on your show, and the work you've been doing has been fantastic, I think, for us all to share some knowledge across the industry. So yeah, looking forward to sharing a little bit of what I know today that might be useful. So experience design is, I guess, how I frame the work that I currently do, and essentially that's about designing experiences and helping people design or redesign their event experiences. There's quite a bit of redesign and rebuilding obviously going on at the moment. And probably the short backstory of how I got to what I'm working on at the moment. There's sort of two parts to what I do. It's that advisory facilitation side of the work and the experience design, and also helping people navigate their way through the industry. And I think we all know there's sort of two sides to events, if you like. You know, there's that inspiring side to it, which we're all drawn to and attracted to, but there's also that challenging side. And I think running an event agency, working with some great people, I certainly realised it was sometimes challenging to find good support systems and forums for us all within our team to support us in our work, but also map out those next steps for us in our work. But also in terms of the experience design, essentially I think the thing that I've recognised over 20 or so years is that ultimately we've got a lot of things to achieve and a lot of things to do, but the experience we provide to people is ultimately what matters the most. And sometimes we sort of forget about that, which is quite easily done when there's a lot of meetings and documentation and decisions and things to put in place. But I think ultimately what we put out into the world and what people experience determines whether they want to show up to our events, whether they'll show up again and what they'll say about the experience to other people, and whether they want to bring other people with them. So that experience being really fundamental to what we offer. That's the whole thing of, I guess, we know that events are what we produce and what we sell, but it's the experiences that people value, and it's what draws them in. It's that very powerful thing we have to play with, the experiences that we offer people. And you mentioned the research I'm doing, and I guess I got curious when I was running the event agency. Curious about how we could explain the value of events and experiences some more, and there's some good research out there, but there was quite a gap in terms of really explaining and having some evidence around some of the things that you and I and we all know and believe, that the power of events and the influence that these events can have on people's behaviour and attitudes. So that was really what sort of drove the idea around that research, of trying to put some evidence around that and tell that story some more. And also, I guess, got very curious about how we can evolve our ways of working, which is really what drew me to the whole experience design approach. We're working with a lot of leading organisations, big brands like Nike and ESPN and Red Bull, and leaders in their fields, and got really curious about how we could use some of their methods, some of their mindsets in our work within events. So I guess that's a bit of the backstory about in terms of, sort of why I've taken the approach I'm currently taking, and you know, hopefully what the value of it is.
Fantastic. And you touched on there, you know, there's sort of those two elements to events. There's the experience, and then there's sort of the logistics design. And I think it's a very easy trap to get caught into, is to just focus on the logistics, that the event runs well, you know, having our guests or spectators in mind, but not putting that experience at the forefront. And we can fall into that trap of just doing what we've always done, because this is how we always set the room, or this is how we always set up the site, without actually stopping and stepping back and actually looking through that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I certainly understand why we sometimes lose focus of what that experience can be and should be for people who attend it. And there is a lot of things we need to get done, and it doesn't happen unless we do those things, you know, behind the scenes, logistics, the administration. So that's not underestimating or undervaluing that work. I think it's just enabling us to have some mindsets, some tools that allow us, no matter what our role is, whether it's in production or creative or comms or whatever it is, to be focusing on how we can develop that experience. Because I think that's why most of us are in events. We want to produce something that people will enjoy, and we put our work out into the world. So I think that's a really unique and powerful thing about working in events. But we all play a role, and some of us are more about you know, process and systems, which is awesome, and that's needed. But it's how we take those different skill sets and mindsets that we have in our work and produce those experiences, because that's ultimately, whatever your role is, that's really what we're judged on. It may not seem like it sometimes in the work we're sort of immersed in and the things we need to work through each day. But ultimately, what we put out into the world is really going to judge how you're perceived and how you've performed.
Exactly. And when we talk about experiences, it's not always, you know, we're talking about big sort of bells and whistles experience. It can be the smallest detail that, you know, has an impact on that experience. And when I think of business events, particularly, I've got a real passion around natural light in conference rooms, because we know the benefit of natural light in learning situations, particularly, you know, schools, what natural light can do to people's moods and concentration and all those kind of changes in our bodies and our brain when we get natural light. Yet we go and put people in a professional learning situation in a dark room, you know, or we feed really heavy lunches that if you know, the event manager like me, and you're sitting in the AV box up the back of the room, you just see that slump in the afternoon as, you know, bodies are trying to break down these heavy carb lunches that, you know, people have thought were yum at the time, but in fact, it's terrible for their, you know, experience. So there's so many even little details that can impact that experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's that big picture. What impact, what influence can we have with our event, and what are we looking to achieve, and what's the purpose of it? But you're right, it's all those small moments, all those layers of the experience, the different senses, the different moments across that journey. That all plays a big role. So yeah, whether you're selecting the venue or deciding how to dress it, or whether it's the comms you're putting out before and during, and you know, each decision that we make affects that experience. So I always talk about this experience loop, I suppose. It's all the cues, all the prompts that we're putting out into the world. What's the response? What's the influence? You know, what experience do we want to provide to people? But you're right. I think it's anything that we put out that's on our run sheet or on our comms plans. Anything that people see and hear throughout that experience is going to influence what they think and what they feel and what they do. So yeah, it's the big moments, but it's also those small subtle things which have a massive impact.
Absolutely. How have you seen the focus change over, say, the last 10 years when it comes to this experience design?
Look, I think it's a bit of a case of it depends. I think I'm sort of cautious when we're talking about events that obviously it's such a vast, broad industry, and parts of the industry and some teams and organisations have evolved significantly, and then others not so much at all. I think you know, the events, the experiences have certainly evolved, but then some of the tools and systems that we've used haven't. And I think if you're still meeting and documenting things in the same way that you did 5, 10, even 2 years ago. Probably need to look at the way that we're working, and because there's so many different ways and new tools and new mindsets that we can use to use our creativity and collaborate and be more productive. So I think, if I think back to what we were doing 10 years ago, some of that's evolved significantly, but then of course there's the fundamental things that we need to have in place which haven't evolved so much. So yeah.
And it's also that thing of not evolving for the sake of evolving, but actually looking at, does each thing, have a meaning? And I sat in on a CSIRO conference on the future of meetings, and one of the academics presented on the last 50 years of conferences and how they had changed. And while, obviously some of the changes were really good, there were still changes that he said they actually haven't replaced the value of the original. And he was talking about pigeonholes, actually, leaving messages for other delegates. And he said, I haven't found, even in an electronic sense, something that still has the benefit of, or the efficiency of how the pigeonholes, those old days of thousands of pigeonholes along the side of the event wall. But it was interesting because he talked about, with progress, we always also lost stuff. So it's really understanding that experience and not just doing something because you can, but coming back to that purpose and understanding what's going to be of benefit to the guests or the spectators, or whoever your audience is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's right. I think there's some fundamentals, there's some principles that let's not beat ourselves up if we haven't completely changed the way we're working from 10 years ago or even last year. I mean, there's some things which are sort of mainstays and the very productive ways of working. I think one example that springs to mind hearing you talk is that whole idea of walking in the shoes of the participants or the fan or the attendee. That principle. I remember working back on the Commonwealth Games, which you worked on, Georgie, back, it's 15 years ago. So, one of the more productive things we used to do was to literally physically map out the journeys that the athletes and the media and people would go on. And that was one of the most productive ways of bringing our team together. We had a planning team of 2 people through to built up to 10 to 100, and we had about 1,000 people working on some of the venues that we were working on. But one of the things we did was just to map out those physical journeys, and that I found was one of the more productive things we did way back then. And of course, that wasn't necessarily about experience design or even customer journey mapping at that point, but as my career has evolved and you start working with organizations and brands like Nike, and you could see this is the way design thinking, service design, these are all ways of working, which I guess framing up these processes in slightly different ways and actually turning it into a process and giving us the tools to do that. So there's a lot of great tools now, whether we use canvases to map out journeys, or there's a lot of great online tools to storyboard those journeys. But the basic principle still is walking in the shoes of that participant, that attendee, that person, no matter who it is, and thinking through that lens and our planning and our work. And that's a great way to collaborate and bring everyone together, give everyone on the same page. It's getting out of our own heads and sharing that information with the team around you. So yeah, I think it's a basic principle, but it's evolving. How we apply that has evolved a lot over the last 10 years. Yeah.
And that's so powerful, that walking in the shoes of our audience, because I think to event debriefs, which every event needs to have a debrief, and they can sometimes be quite confronting, of things that did work or didn't work.
Yep.
But we often are looking at it with our lens on, as the event manager or the client or the venue. But are we actually doing the debrief considering what the journey? I mean, obviously, if the food's come out late, we're sort of looking at from the delegate or the spectator's view, but are we actually really doing the debrief with their lens on, rather than just sort of our planning lens on? So
it's a great example, I think, Georgie. I mean, we're only human, so we start to think about, what does this mean for us? And it's not through ill intent or even ego. I think it's just that I want to do a great job. So when I'm debriefing and evaluating this event, what can I be doing better? And unfortunately, we sort of default back then to what do we need to do back of house, rather than what can we do to make this experience better or have more influence, or whatever the measures of success are. So again, I think this experience design approach is really sort of changing the way of looking at those debriefs and setting up those meetings, those discussions, to be focused on walking in the shoes of the participant, the attendee, the fan, so that we don't lose sight of that in those discussions, and we forget that that's what we're really trying to focus on. So, using setting up your sessions, your debrief workshops, and using some of the tools like canvases, or even just the way you structure those conversations, those discussions, doing that differently, you'll get different discussions and different outcomes than what you've always had in the past.
Yeah, and it can be that simple, isn't it? Just reframing the way you do the words you use, or the sort of phrases you use in that debrief can completely change, the angle that you're looking at it from.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. And I think the important thing is everyone's got something to contribute to that. So I'm not sort of saying that let's not focus on what we need to achieve back of house, and that if you're working in production, the ops teams, whatever, a lot of the best ideas will come from you and from those teams, and they may be creative ideas, they may be practical solutions, but I think that gives each part of your team the ability to contribute to this experience and this front of house journey that we're providing people, and it gives people the opportunity, some of your stakeholders, to contribute. People from the venues and all these different perspectives and valuable insights and experiences that people have. That framing these sessions up in that way allows you to pull the best from different people, and it's surprising where the ideas and the insights come from. People just want to be asked and want to have that forum to share things.
Exactly, and we sort of, it's easy to, I guess, forget how many people are actually involved and collaborate a lot more effectively and authentically, rather than just say we're working together, actually work together. Because you say it's not just these two people in this department that are have all the ideas. The person in the AV box sees a whole different angle of the event. Each role sees the event from a different angle and interacts with the audience in a different way, which gives insights that other people don't have. So it's bringing all those ideas together and not discounting or making assumptions of who would have an idea or who wouldn't, because you say the best ideas can come sometimes from the most unexpected place.
Absolutely, that's right. And I think unless we set up forums and discussions for those ideas to be shared, otherwise they'll just sit in everyone's silo. We all want to get out of our silos and work together, but we don't often give ourselves the time or the sessions, the meetings, the workshops to do that, and it just sits in people's Google Docs or their own files and processes and systems. But yeah, those different vantage points, the experiences that we have, we talk about using data to make better decisions. I mean, yes, that is about metrics and measures, and there's so much we can use in experience design, some tangible things to make great decisions, use the evidence. But the data also comes from, the different people, the different perspectives, the lived experiences. The guys and girls sitting in the AV box have a lot of insight and information they can share. And that truly does allow people to work together and produce better outcomes. So,
absolutely.
Critical.
And working together probably has never been so prevalent as the last 6 months, or 7 months, 8 months, however long this year's been going for, when we really were thrown that curveball of having to completely, pause events, rethink how we could deliver them when we couldn't put on live events. And what I sort of keep saying is we've been dealt this bad hand, but out of it, we can make the most of it. And what I've loved to see is the collaboration of people who perhaps previously seen each other as competitors and kind of been a little bit, this is my IP and I'm not sharing it. But the way people have worked together has been amazing, and I think only strengthened the industry.
Absolutely, and I think there's always been that sentiment or mindset within people who work in events that we want to share ideas, and that we're more passionate about the work and the things we can produce than we are about sort of competing with each other. I think but sometimes we need things, a catalyst to allow us to be able to talk to each other, and this has been a great catalyst, if you want to put a positive spin on it, I suppose. That's got us out of our normal ways of working, and we're normally heads down getting that next job done. So I think people have responded to it, and some of the forums that you've established. What we're trying to do with the event show really was to use this as an opportunity to create some platforms to share these ideas, and people have jumped into it, either to come on and share their thoughts, and very, very open to that, or to listen in and use that knowledge. So yeah, I think it's been quite a critical crossroads, if you like, for us in industry, and I'm sure we'll sort of bounce out of this better for it in so many ways. But obviously there's a few pains to be worked through in the meantime, and certainly not underestimating the challenges a lot of us are still facing. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's seeing that collaboration, sharing of knowledge, sharing of insights, and being able to tell those good news stories that events can provide, that immense influence that events have on all those different levels of sort of measures of success, being able to share those and work out how to improve upon those in the future is hopefully going to set us all up to be in a better place as we come out of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has forced us to completely rethink things over the last 6 months, and you know, whether that's going virtual, or I guess there's sort of the stages, the immediate adaptation that needed to happen, and then the long term, or you know, when we will transition back to live events. And obviously in, you know, most states that's happening, and in regional areas of Victoria, I'm, you know, working with a sporting organisation where they're starting to run their small competitions, so it's starting to happen. What have you sort of seen over the last 6 months with how people are rethinking that experience design? Are they rethinking it? You know, how much do we bring our audience's behaviours and changes and needs into it, of how they've sort of reacted over the last 6 months?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a it depends answer for me from what I've seen. I've seen some people, some organisations which I'm working with really jump into it, lean into it, if you like, during this phase. Is that they've always wanted to work in this way some more. They could see the value of it, but haven't necessarily had that circuit breaker, that pause to have the time and probably the capacity to start to work and think in different ways, or even just to evolve their way of working. And this is not about putting in a whole lot more work and a whole new way over the top of what you currently have to do. This is about actually replacing, you know, that way of working, or sort of transitioning into a slightly different way of working. So to answer your question, some people are really running with it and you know, creating some really quite different and innovative experiences as a whole, or to your point earlier, you know, focusing on some key moments, which is the best place to start, and changing some of those moments in the experience, whether it's to get people to sign up, or when they show up, or you know, what they might share afterwards. We know there's some peak moments in any experience, so that's what we've been doing, is to focus on what can we change to have a greater influence, and then keep evolving from there. But also, yeah, I think some organisations haven't evolved too much yet, and it does depend and on what position they're in. A lot of the work that I've also been doing is more about scenario planning, and you know, I think it's which is still all related to the experience, and the work we do is about the experience you produce front of house, but it's also about having the right things in place behind the scenes to be able to produce those experiences. And we, you know, again, there's two sides to the events that we all produce, these experiences. It's what's produced into the wider world, but also what's needed. And I think that's something important that I really always try and work on with people, is that let's not just paint this picture of what it is that we can achieve and put out into the world. We need to make sure it's actually achievable and manageable behind the scenes. And again, going back to what we're talking about before, that's what's so good, having so many different parts of the team represented in these discussions, because you don't just run off with an idea which isn't feasible, or isn't going to drive any revenue, or in fact is going to cost too much money, or it's so again, I think, you know, making sure that we've got the right model, the right delivery systems in place, and that's what we've been working on with some people during this off season, if you want to call it that. So then when they're able to start producing experiences again, have a different way of working and a different mindset across their teams to then go out and produce these amazing experiences.
Fantastic. And, you know, one way we can do that is we are fortunate that there is actually so many virtual events happening at the moment. There's hybrid events starting to happen. And what I say to people is just tune into as many as you can, because this is all new for everyone, really. You know, I mean, none of us have been through a pandemic like this. Some people had been running hybrid events and virtual events, but we're all learning. So have a look at what other people are doing. See what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, what worked, what didn't work, how you could incorporate that to your event. You know, even going out to restaurants, not in Melbourne just yet, but in other areas, because you start to get a sense of, oh, I didn't feel comfortable with this, or okay, yep, no, this worked for me. And so it's not even just looking in your own event, look outside your own event, and you start to get little sparks of ideas of you know, how other people are doing it well or not doing it well, and what you can learn from that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I think we do need to look, I'm biased, but look at the experience that you're trying to produce and create for people, and then look at the platforms and whether that's physical interactions or virtual interactions. And I sort of think it matters, but it doesn't in terms of the whole sort of physical virtual thing. I think it's all real life now, and has been for some time. And so I think it's yeah, to me, it's no different in many ways in terms of, well, I talk about events simply, and I think it's good to simplify things because they can be very complex. But, you know, events are basically people coming together at a time and a place. And I think that place component of it, we've always had to decide what venue, you know, whether it's indoors, outdoors, what platforms to communicate on. And I think it's no different now in that we need to decide, well, is there a virtual place, a virtual interaction, an online interaction, which plays a role in this experience? And for some events, it's a big yes, and maybe even more so than what it was for the same event 2 years ago or 6 months ago. We may find that the virtual, if we call it virtual, online, digital components, interactions before and during and after the event are actually great to dial up and amplify. For some, it might not be appropriate at all. And again, it's just like, you know, sometimes we're given a venue, a place that we have to work with, and we make the most of that. In the moment, I think we're sort of making the most of the virtual world. But there's also a point where you've got to say, well, actually, that venue, that place, that virtual world just doesn't work for us. And so you go away from that and go to another location to hold your event and your experience. Yeah. I think to answer your question, I think it's working well for some. It's not going to work so well for others, and I think we need to realise that and design the experience based on the different places that we can interact.
Yeah, that's so important. It's not this blanket thing of, you know, virtual events will be fine or virtual events won't work. It really depends on what you're trying to get out, you know, what the purpose of your event is and what that experience you're trying to create is. I attended an event last week. It was online. It was a fundraising event. It was a pledge event. I attended the same event last year in person, and it surprised me how much more connected I was in the online event. And I would be interested to know, I would say they probably raised more in the online event, because people were making pledges in the chat function, and there was an intimacy to it and this sort of camaraderie. We all felt part of this amazing event as people are donating. We're watching the, you know, amounts go up, and the MC, Jacinta Parsons, was great. She sort of brought us all in, called out everyone's names. Whereas in the live event, you kind of lost that. You were just looking at people on the stage, and a few people stood up. Not everyone was sort of comfortable. They may have gone away and donated after, but that didn't generate that sort of momentum. So I'll be interested to see that event next year, what elements, you know, they take from how well it worked online. And it's one of the best I've seen, and it surprised me. There was nothing bells and whistles about it. It was just an online platform with a chat function and some live presentations, but they created a real intimacy and network, which I think just kept generating more donations. So yeah, it's interesting how it can work even better than the live events, but then how do you adapt that? Because we're not going to want to just be online for, you know, the rest of the time.
That's right, and that sounds like a great example. I think, Georgie, you know, there's going to be some wins for us in terms of how we've changed the platforms that we're using and how we're interacting. I think the other thing that's come out for me, sort of related to this question, is having been a participant in the virtual events and online events, and then also being an organizer of and a producer of. I think that it's obviously quite different, and I think that's obviously stating the obvious, but I think it's become more and more apparent in speaking to a lot of people who run virtual events of different types. Again, much the same as it is from doing an indoor event to an outdoor event, perhaps, and that different skills, different considerations, different systems, different tools are all needed. And I think we've always kind of understood that, but even the ways we run online workshops and sessions, communication's still a critical skill, but the way we communicate and some of those subtle little things that we do is quite different. And then, of course, behind the scenes, trying to manage a virtual event experience is quite different to a physical one. You can't just go and tap someone on the shoulder and say, can you perhaps come over here, or can you do this, or you can. So again, it's taking a different set of skills or evolving some of those skills. And that's probably the key thing I'm sort of recognizing, is that like any event, there's some similar principles and skills and mindsets needed, but there's also some particular things that you really need to tap into and get the right people and agencies and suppliers involved to make that happen.
Exactly. And once again, it's walking in the shoes of the people attending. And I heard a case study of someone that actually run a hybrid event in January, and they packed the program, not meaning for delegates to go to each session, but they just were offering all these sorts of things from sort of 9 in the morning till 10 at night, whether it was breakouts or plenary sessions or cooking sessions, and there was barely any break in between, but they just wanted to offer a whole lot. And they said, but what we found is people felt they needed to go to everything. People wanted to take advantage, and then it was completely too much for them. And we had to start scheduling coffee breaks between virtual breakout sessions, where people needed to get up and stretch, but it wasn't until after they realized, the user experience is completely different to what we had done, this well-intended kind of just pick and mix which sessions. But the psychology of people attending was, this is on offer, I need to go to everything.
Yeah, I think it's really it's a really good point. I think it's again sort of coming back to, isn't it? It's walking in the shoes, as you say, and understanding the context that that sort of the model that I work with is very much looking at your audience and the activity that you've got, and what's the experience and how you bring that together. But it's also the context around that, so I think we need to understand what's influencing people in the environment when that event and that experience is being staged, and that's quite different in different occasions. So what is it? What are their expectations? What are their norms of behaviour that they are going to just sort of walk into this next experience, assuming that's the way this will roll? So I think it's understanding that bigger picture and the context as well, as we design our experiences, and how people may come into that experience and what their sort of assumptions are and their normal rituals and all of these things that we can sort of unpack and play around with and design the experience.
Yeah, and even looking at sort of what the consumer sentiment is at the moment around how people feel about coming back to out-of-home activities, as they sort of call it, and what their priorities are at the moment that might have been different to a year ago. So we know cleaning and sanitisation and social distancing ranks very high at the moment, but you don't just want to make sure you've got all of those in place. You still want to create an experience and how you sort of bring all of that together.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it's interesting, sort of reminds me of your question about what sort of changed in the last 6 months. And I think I've noticed a lot of the people that I work with segmenting their audiences a little bit differently. I think, we've been walking in the shoes of our different participant groups or constituent groups in the past, but I think doing that, segmenting your audience or building personas based on their relationship with you and their current perception of what that event experience might be and some of their current concerns is really important. And I think we're seeing, let's say generally speaking, that people that are more connected and attached to that event or that organisations are more willing to attend and come back, whereas those sort of less connected, the more fickle followers, if you like, some of those other concerns, or they might be a bit more, let's wait and see and come back later. So I think that's useful in terms of segmenting the audience and those journeys that we build, and understanding how we communicate with them and what information they do and don't need going into the experience and during and afterwards. Then that now more than ever, people are looking for different things and coming in with different sort of preconceived ideas and perceptions and needs than ever before. So segmenting our audiences based on that and taking those participant journeys based on that is a really important way and really valuable way of making sure you're meeting each of their expectations.
Absolutely. And the whole thing we talked about events is that people will want to come to your event and they'll want to come back because they've had such a great experience, and they'll want to go and tell people, and they'll come. And it's there's a great Walt Disney quote, which I'm going to completely paraphrase, but do what you do so well that people will want to come back and see you do it again, and then they'll want to go and tell others to come and see what you do. And that's what we're doing with events. What are you seeing? Is there anything overseas or around Australia that you're seeing that you're loving, or that has really caught your eye in the last 6 months?
Yeah, look, your example then sort of makes me think of something which I just popped up on my feed again this week. So I think, well, to answer the question, I think some things which are really succeeding overseas and anywhere are those that are evolving, but still connecting back to those basic principles that some of which we've talked about today. And I think, as you just said, that experience, if you can really nail that, then people are going to come back and they're going to want to bring other people with them. It's the nature of today's world. No matter what, people, we're living in the experience economy. People quite rightfully want to have experiences in their lives, and they want to bring others in and get them involved. And so I think, if we can provide those experiences which really connect with people, but within the context of what we're currently working within, then they're the ones that are winning. And so the example, there's a concept called Rocking 1000, which I've called out a few times in some of the sessions I run, but basically there's a movie being made about this event and released in Italy this week. And I think you're doing pretty well with your event if they're making movies about it. But for those that haven't seen it, Rocking 1000, I guess in short, is as the name kind of suggests, it's a bunch of musicians, 1,000 musicians that have come together for events. But the reason for it, the rationale initially was a guy, Fabio Zaffaghini, I think his name is, an Italian guy, wanted to, his call to action, his interest was in getting the Foo Fighters to come and play in his small town in Italy. So he got a bunch of his music friends together, and in the end, 1,000 of his music friends together and pulled together this band, which played Foo Fighters' "Learning to Fly," I think it was, a few years ago in Italy. And look, the reason I sort of call this out is that the journey they've been on, I think it's a great example of those fundamental elements of an experience that, we can do something by ourselves. You can play an instrument, but if you get other people to come together and do it together, it becomes even more powerful. You play an instrument in a band, it's even more meaningful. It's that sort of that shared experience amplifies that interest. But then he's maxed that to getting 1,000 people to come together. And the experience, if you haven't seen it, it's jump on and check out Rocking 1000. But the power of that experience for those 1,000 people, but also it's become a very shared experience, has gone viral, and millions have seen that experience since on YouTube. And what they've also done is then scaled that experience, and there's been Rocking 1000 events held throughout Europe. And I guess that shared interest of music and coming together has been a really powerful thing, which is central to the design of that experience, and produced some amazing moments of people that have been involved. But people are now buying tickets to see these different bands that are popping up play, and it's being shared online and streamed, and now it's become a movie. So I guess to answer your question, I think it's an example of, I think that's that those fundamental elements of people with a real passion for something coming together and really understanding what that shared interest and that passion is, which is done brilliantly.
And Rocking 1000.
Rocking 1000, yeah, it's a great thing. Yeah, it's every time I watch the new videos that come out, it always sends a chill up your spine. I think it just explains the power of events and experiences. So so I think to answer your question, I think, overseas we're seeing different things emerge, but then also I think, as we know, overseas that industry, our industry, is going to be affected for possibly so much longer than it is in Australia. And probably the last point on all this is, I think, having worked across many global events or with brands that are global brands, and events that we've produced here, or World Cups, or major events have been part of a global series or global comparisons. And Australia and New Zealand always stacks up extremely well in those situations. So I completely agree. We need to look beyond our bubble and see what's happening and what's evolving, and the cool things which are happening overseas, but also I think also have acknowledgement that some of the things that we're doing, someone across the other side of Melbourne, or in Adelaide, or Perth, or in Auckland, it's highly likely they are going to be world leading in what they're doing as well. So let's share ideas, steal ideas from each other, and use those as well, because I think there's a lot of those answers are sitting, staring us in the face in some respects.
Exactly, and if I point to the CSIRO conference, scientific meetings are huge. Obviously, it's where they present papers and various finds and studies are presented. And I've never run a scientific meeting. I remember looking at the program thinking, oh, okay, so there was no one from the event industry. It was mainly academics presenting, but of course they're the ones that run the event, so they do not. And I think that event has shaped and informed me the most out of the last 6 months than any other event. And it was one that was so far outside what I would usually go to, because it didn't seem to match with everything that I did. So it's also, looking outside. And as you say, in Australia, we've got some amazing stuff in New Zealand, but even looking outside. It's funny when you were talking about Rocking 1000, it just made me think sometimes, it's just tapping into that sentiment. And there's a movement called F Up Nights. I won't curse on this, but which came out, I think, Mexico, and it was a few people sitting around talking about the mistakes they had made, but what they'd learnt. And I think that's human behaviour that we worry about. Are we the only ones that have stuffed something up? And you don't talk about your mistakes, but they've created this global event movement where people get up and talk about their professional disasters or their mistakes, and in fact what they learnt from it. And there's no bells and whistles to those events, but the messaging and that sentiment they've tapped into, understanding sort of, I guess, human behaviour, and that's what we want to come together with other people who maybe made a mistake and know, oh, that's okay, we're just human. And that's taken off across the world.
Yeah, I think it's a great example, isn't it? I think it's this very powerful tool that we have in our hands, which again, sometimes we forget, quite naturally so, because there's a lot of things we need to do in our days. But if you can find that shared interest, that passion, it can be a real spark to, most of the great events around the world have usually come from a small group of like-minded people. And that's grown, evolved and scaled from that. So I think, either creating a new event, a new experience, or even within that experience, finding those little moments which are really going to be that wow factor and things that people will talk about and share later.
Yeah.
Again, we all know that it's one or two things. If you think back to an event you went to last year, you won't remember it all, but you'll remember a couple of key moments or a couple of the interactions, a couple of the people that you met when you were there. That's what's going to stand out. So I think in our experiences, if we can tap into that little spark, that little element, then that's really powerful.
Yeah, and as you say, it often starts with a small group of people, and we don't have to look too far. Even in Victoria, at Clunes, and how they've created their book weekend festival. That's now the whole town is known as the Book Town. And that just started off with a couple of people pulling that together, but they've tapped into something, and before you know it, it's turned the town around into it with a whole new identity.
Yeah, that's right. I think that the influence. I talk a lot about influence in our work. It can come in so many different ways and can produce different things for different people and different organisations. And it's about whether you're a town or you're a bank, or whether you're in a sports organisation. I think it's it's looking at what can this experience, what influence can it have on the people that you need to serve and that you want to provide an experience for. And there's so many different ways that we can evolve our experiences and use what we've currently got, or to redesign what we've currently got, or build new cool things. Yeah, there's so much potential there, isn't there?
Oh, so much. It's been so great chatting to you today, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out more or listen to the event show, where should they head?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Georgie. I loved chatting as always. And look, if I can help anyone with their work and either designing experiences or helping them navigate their way through, best place probably to start is just andrewo'loughlin.com. The event show and the event show live sessions are all listed on there. And yeah, obviously there's information about the work that I do and how we go about it. There's a few free downloads and things there. I did put together a book a little while ago, which touched on some of the things that we've talked about today. So that's freely available to download as well. So please, yeah, jump on, but yeah, reach out at any time, drop me an email, give me a call. Love to hear from people and see what we might be able to achieve together.
Fantastic. And I highly recommend to head to Andrew's website. There's some amazing podcasts that he's done over the last few years for the event show that, if, you know, whatever level you're working in an event, you will find them fascinating. And as you say, the event show live, where you've been giving a voice to the industry and bringing panels together, is, you know, incredibly powerful. And so, as Molly would say, do yourself a favour and tune into them. So thanks so much, Andrew. Wishing you a great rest of the day and a safe rest of this crazy period that we're in. But we look forward to that time when our mass participation events, you know, are back in full swing and creating amazing experiences for people.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Enjoyed it. Thank you.